A minuscule amount of sarin killed 12 commuters on a Tokyo subway in 1995. The vial lay flat inside a thin plastic bag, then slipped into the leather briefcase of a business traveler who thought the weight of his paperwork was the only thing he carried. That night, a small, humming fridge in a cramped apartment rattled with the sound of a vacuum pump, while a thin column of glass, no larger than a school backpack, glowed orange under a flickering lamp. A lab no larger than a studio apartment could produce enough of that nerve agent to choke a city's worth of passengers. The truth behind that impossible chemistry will be exposed. How did a spiritual cult, staffed by doctors and engineers, turn a tiny apartment into a weapon that poisoned thousands? If a handful of educated professionals could smuggle a deadly poison onto public trains, what does that say about the security of any nation's infrastructure? The city's pulse would race toward a trembling emergency response. In 1984, a former Asahi researcher named Shoko Asahara, born Chizuo Matsumoto, a man who habitually wore a plain white shirt and kept a battered notebook in his coat pocket, founded Aum Shinrikyo. He blended Buddhist meditation, Hindu yoga, Christian apocalypse and New Age mysticism into a single promise: salvation through the mind's power. The group's early meetings were held in modest community halls, where participants practiced silent sitting while Asahara whispered about the coming spiritual war. The air smelled of incense and damp wood, and the low hum of an old ceiling fan kept the room at a steady, oppressive heat. The walls, paper-covered and faintly warped, seemed to pulse with each whispered syllable, and a thin veil of dust floated lazily in shafts of weak sunlight. Among the newcomers were a university-trained chemist who liked to twirl a silver ring on his finger before experiments, and a pediatrician who always carried a small vial of hand sanitizer for nervous patients. Both were drawn by the allure of a scientific path to enlightenment. What drew such professionals? Aum offered access to exclusive research, papers on mind-body interaction that mainstream academia dismissed. It also promised financial security through a for-profit branch called Aum Supply Chain, which sold health foods and software. The promise of a steady income while pursuing higher consciousness created a rare incentive: earn a living while awakening. In the early 1990s, police later uncovered a bank deposit ledger belonging to Aum's inner circle. The ledger showed regular monthly deposits of substantial sums from members into a single account labeled Spiritual Fund. Those funds were funneled directly into purchasing high-precision gas chromatography columns, equipment normally reserved for university research labs. The clink of coins being dropped into the ledger's leather binding echoed the quiet determination of the cult's financiers. Aum's financial engine was a three-pronged system. Member donations, followers encouraged to give spiritual offerings, calculated as a percentage of their income, filled the first slot. Real estate ventures bought apartment buildings in Tokyo's suburbs, leasing them to members and generating steady rent that sounded like distant traffic on a rainy night. Aum Supply Chain, a legally registered company, sold health food products and computer software, reporting profits that peaked like a sunrise over the corporate filings. All these streams converged into a secret treasury overseen by Asahara's inner circle, including a former accountant who handled the group's books with the meticulousness of a watchmaker. The accounting records listed purchases of industrial-grade chemicals, acetone, methylphosphonic acid, and other precursors, under the guise of laboratory reagents for medical research. The ink on those pages was still slightly wet when the police seized them. The turning point came when an internal memorandum circulated in the mid-1990s. The thin paper smelled faintly of printer toner as it was passed hand to hand. It instructed senior scientists to accelerate synthesis of nerve agents under the pretext of defensive research. The memo did not specify an end use, but its language implied an offensive shift. That midnight in early 1994, Asahara delivered a holy directive during a meditation session that stretched until the first light of dawn. His voice, low and resonant, filled the cold concrete room, while the flicker of a single fluorescent tube painted his silhouette on the walls. He declared that the world's spiritual battle required a cleansing fire, and that the group's scientific team must forge a weapon that only the enlightened can wield. The words hung in the air like static, and the distant rumble of a passing train underscored the urgency. Following this sermon, the lab in Kumagaya began producing sarin in earnest. A schematic found among the lab documents showed a compact vaporizer designed to release sarin when a train slowed, exactly the device later used in the subway attack. The schematic bore Asahara's signature seal, confirming his personal involvement in the engineering design. The paper crackled as the seal was pressed, a subtle reminder of the cult's blend of ritual and technology. Aum's recruitment was not merely ideological, it employed systematic psychological pressure. New members endured sleep deprivation meditations lasting up to 48 hours, during which Asahara's voice was broadcast on a loop, repeating apocalyptic verses while the room's lights dimmed to a sickly amber. Afterward, members were forced into confession circles, where they publicly recounted personal doubts. The silence that followed each confession was broken only by the rustle of clothing and the occasional gasp of a breath finally released. Failure to confess resulted in public shaming and temporary exclusion from group meals, the clatter of empty plates echoing the loss. Physicians reported that, after weeks of such conditioning, they began to rationalize the creation of sarin as a defensive act, aligning it with their newly internalized belief that the world required spiritual cleansing. Their lab coats, once symbols of sterile precision, now seemed to carry the weight of a sacred mission. Police raids in the mid-1990s uncovered additional sarin containers hidden in a basement beneath the Kumagaya facility. The containers held enough agent for a simultaneous release at all major Tokyo stations, a plan that would have multiplied casualties tenfold. Investigators traced the storage to a sealed crate labeled "Future Offering." Inside, a timed release mechanism waited for a command signal that was never sent because the raid disrupted the operation. The metallic clang of the crate lid closing resonated like a final warning that had been ignored. The answer lies in the scale of Aum's covert laboratory. In a cramped unit on the outskirts of Saitama, a single-room lab housed a gas chromatography column, a high-temperature reactor, and a vacuum pump. Despite its modest footprint, the lab could produce kilograms of sarin within weeks, as documented in the group's production logs. The room's only window was a sliver of frosted glass, letting in a thin strip of gray light that fell on the stainless steel surfaces, making them gleam like cold knives. The constant low hum of the pump mixed with the occasional hiss of a valve, creating a soundscape that felt more like a ritual than a laboratory. Because the facility